The example I'm giving you is a real example apart from changing the name. 2 years ago, I went to Milan to visit Dallo Klein, an American cosmetics manufacturer. And that's where I met Anna for the first time. Anna was responsible for the European e-learning initiative. She had been with Dallo Klein for maybe 10 years, and initially she'd worked as a classroom instructor. That was a job she really liked because it allowed her to pick the content, to package the courses, and finally to present to the classes what it is that she'd put together. And it was precisely because Anna was so good at this job that she'd been given the promotion as e-learning manager. But e-learning was very different from classroom instruction. In fact, she didn't do a lot of instruction or content development at all. She seemed to think that most of her time was spent coordinating and communicating with everybody else. She would be in touch with the creative agency creating the e-learning course. She would have to coordinate the translation company, us. She was in constant contact with the InCountry reviewers. And of course, there was no end to the number of people within her company who wanted input into her e-learning program. It was getting too much for Anna. And she decided, for her own sanity, she needed to solve this problem. Ideally, if she could find a tool which would just get rid of it altogether. She knew she had a problem with communications. And that's what she then focused on. She researched the entire market for communications and collaboration tools. And finally, she came across Forum. Forum just seemed to have everything she was looking for. Forum had email. Forum had calendars. Forum had task lists. You could move the tasks around in a graphical manner. Conversations could be grouped according to date, to person, or to group of people. Forum had instant chat. Forum had video. But best of all, Forum was in the cloud, which meant she would not have to do any system administration. She was sure getting Forum would solve her communication problems. She was not so sure whether she would get approval because she wasn't all that comfortable with the technical details. And that's why she asked me to help her out beef up the technical content of the application for funding. And you might be in the same situation as Anna, where you have to make a business case if you want funding to buy a tool. If you do, please type in business case. On the other hand, if you have your own budget, type budget in the chat window. In my 25 years with Rubric, I have lost count of the number of software packages I have seen. Unused, unutilizable, and in some cases even unopened. It's not that the software doesn't do what it says on the box, but what most often happens is that what it says on the box does not correspond to what the customer actually needs. You may have found yourself in a situation like this, but I certainly didn't want Anna to end up amongst that long list of clients with failed software projects. So I agreed to help her. She was very happy. But I did warn her. I wanted to understand the problem in more detail, and that the outcome might be that we wouldn't even buy Forum. She was skeptical because she was pretty sure that Forum was going to be the answer, but she agreed anyway. When I'm in a situation like this, I like to use a framework. And in this case, I use a framework called the Localization Maturity Model from CSA Research. And the Localization Maturity Model, or LMM, has 5 discrete steps. And I will be describing them one after the other, but it's more of a circular arrangement or even a web-like arrangement because each component feeds into the other. The first step in the LMM is governance. And I would like you to type in the word KPI if you are currently tracking some KPIs. I asked Anna which KPIs she was tracking, and she said she's tracking project costs and she's tracking costs per view. I thought that was good, but I was concerned that she was only tracking costs, not the benefits of her work. And secondly, I didn't really see that costs would be affected by introducing Forum. So I suggested to her maybe some metrics around what Forum was supposed to be fixing, such as the number of communications she might have with, say, the InCountry reviewers, the number of conversations, how long it took to communicate with the reviewers. And she agreed, and she started tracking those. But I also wanted to look at the benefits of and the impact of what it was that she was producing to the company. So I asked her, look outside, look at your competitors, what are they doing? And she started looking and she started tracking which of the competitors were doing e-learning courses, how many e-learning courses they were doing, how frequently they were being updated, how many languages they were in. So she ended up gathering some really useful metrics, both internal and external. The next step in the LMM is strategy. And I would like you to type in the word strategy if you think you know what the company's strategy is. I asked Anna, and her answer was, it is to make money. Isn't that the strategy of every company? And I told her no. It might be, well, it's hopefully the effect of having good strategies, but it's rarely the strategy itself. And I gave her 3 examples that I'll share with you. The first was Google, the company. Google make a lot of money, but that's not their strategy. Their strategy is to, or rather their vision, is to make the world's knowledge searchable. And all the company strategies flow from that vision. And because they execute so well on that vision, they don't have to search for profits. The profits come looking for them. The second example is Apple. Apple didn't set out to make great profits. No, Apple set out to make great products. And because they make great products, they built a great company and have built a great deal of profits as a result. But strategies don't remain static. And that's where I came to the third example, Microsoft. Microsoft had a vision to put a PC on every desktop. And they almost got there. And then the world changed. It took some time for Microsoft to adapt to this, but their vision now is cloud first, mobile first. And since they've changed to that strategy, Microsoft have regained some of their earlier momentum. But I'm doing Anna a disservice here, because of course she knew what her company strategy was. It was to empower consumers in an environmentally friendly way. And if you do not know what your company strategy is, find out. You can find out by looking at your company's annual report. If you don't have access to that, ask your corporate communications team, because they certainly ought to know what the company's vision and strategies are. I then wanted Anna to look at some other strategies. I asked her about her globalization strategy, and she said, Ian, you know, we operate worldwide. That is our globalization strategy. I told her that I'd been to Antarctica the year before, and I hadn't seen any retail outlets selling Dallo Klein products. So there was clearly limits to what worldwide actually meant. And she said, yeah, of course, in any case, I'm only concerned about Europe. So I said, that's okay. But I also know that you've got operations in Thailand, in Korea, and in Japan. He said, yeah, well, one day when they eventually will take our materials, at least Forum supports those languages. But until then, it's a waste of time. And I thought, okay, what about your boss? What does she think? She's even more frustrated than I am. We produce some great content here in Europe, and the Asians, they just want to do their own thing. So I made a note of the fact that Asia was not part of this business case. The third strategy I wanted Anna to look at was her content strategy. And she said, well, at a company level, our strategy is to move from print to digital. And you may find that your own company strategy is the same. But Anna also had a different content strategy, or separate content strategy, which was that every e-learning course she would produce would come in 3 versions. One would be for the distributors, the second would be for the retailers, and the third would be for the end customer, once the product was widely available. So I made a note of the fact that reuse of information from one version to the next might be a useful feature of whichever tool we eventually went for. The third step in the LMM is process. And I would like you to type in the word process if you've changed the way you're working in the last year or so. During my investigation of Anna's problem, we identified many minor issues which we tweaked and had resolved. But I would like to highlight 2 large ones. These 2 are going to be different from what you might be working with. But I encourage you to look at your own processes regularly and review what's going on. In the case of Anna, the 2 processes that we looked at were InCountry review and the creative agency. For those of you who have never worked or have never been in touch with the localization industry, you may not know what an in-country reviewer does or is. An in-country reviewer sits in-country, surprise, surprise. Their role is to make sure that what gets produced at headquarters is relevant to their market. For example, a product may be available Europe-wide, but it has been recalled in the Russian market for whatever reason. The people in country in Russia will know that that product is no longer available. This information may not have flowed back to Anna, and in many cases it would certainly not have flowed through to the translation company or the creative company. And this is where the in-country reviewer adds so much value. They add the local knowledge. The in-country reviewer should not be doing spell checking. They shouldn't be rewriting the copy, because if they are, there is a much more fundamental problem which needs to be resolved separately. And it might end up with changing the translator or something like that. But coming back to the in-country reviewer. Most of Anna's communications were with the in-country reviewers because they would never answer her queries, or at least she would have to write to them 5 or 6 times before she got an answer. And the reason is they are part-timers. Reviewing is not their full-time job. They're typically maybe salespeople, they could be tech support people, they might be marketing people. So they have other jobs, and doing review is a small part which gets added on top of their work. We suggested to Anna that there may be some advantage to our taking on this role and having the translators talk directly to the reviewers. And I gave her an example that we had come across just the year before. We were doing a Brazilian project for an American manufacturer. And like Anna, the reviewer rarely got around to providing review comments. But when he did, we would get screed loads of linguistic comments, glossary comments, which were contrary to what we'd agreed. And it was clear that this person thought that our translator was not a native Brazilian speaker and probably lived in Miami, Dallas, or San Francisco. We spoke to the client and said that we need to get our translator to talk to the reviewer because there's a breakdown of communication here. And the client agreed. Imagine the surprise when the reviewer found out that the translator was not only a native Brazilian, but lived in Sao Paulo, which is where he was living. So they met up, they had a coffee, they thrashed out all their differences, and after that the project went smoothly. And at the end of the project, those two, they were the best buddies in Brazil. The second process that we looked at was that of the creative agency. The creative agency was responsible for coordinating the creation of the English course. But they were also responsible for gathering the translations from us and making the translated versions of the e-learning course. And then they were responsible for getting review comments from the reviewers and incorporating those into the translated e-learning courses. And then there would be updates to the content coming from Anna's colleagues. So that would have to be incorporated into the English version, which then had to flow through to the translations Once the translations came back, they would update the courses, they would get the review comments, they would then go in. The creative agency didn't have a great system, but they were literally swimming in a sea of spreadsheets, trying to keep track of all of these changes, and there were thousands. We suggested to Anna that since we might be taking on the responsibility of talking directly to the reviewers, it might make sense for us to produce the translated versions of the e-learning courses. And she thought that might be a great idea, but she would have to think about it. She could see that if we were going to take the communications from the in-country reviewers and the communications with the e-learning creative agency, the business case for Forum was fast evaporating. Moving on to the fourth LMM step, people. In Anna's case, many people had input into her process. I would like you to type in the job title of a person who has input in your daily work. We looked at the relationship that Anna had with her in-country reviewers to try to get to the bottom of this communications bottleneck. And we found something strange, because we found that some reviewers were very responsive and they would get their review comments done in round 1 or 2. Other reviewers were unresponsive, and it was only in round 4, 5, or even 6 that their review comments would come through. We decided to look into this in more depth. And the curious thing was, the issues being raised in rounds 4, 5, and 6 were actually there in rounds 1 and 2. Why did they not pick them up then? So we decided to ask the reviewers directly. And we spoke to Paolo, who was one of the reviewers concerned. You have no idea. Anna has no idea. But I have a full-time job here, and I am doing her a great favor. But it's not just for her. She's got 7 colleagues. They're all dumping work on me. As well as that, just as we're coming up to the holidays, I get this avalanche of work from all of them, and I can see what's happening. They want to clear their desks before they go off on holiday, and when they come back, they expect me to have done all the work. And not only that, I have 2 other colleagues here, and they too are going off on holiday, so I am left holding the fort during the holiday here. The only way I can get work done is to start prioritizing. And I know that Anna's courses always go through 5 or 6 rounds anyway, so why waste my time by doing rounds 1, 2, 3, 4 when I have to do rounds 5 and 6 as well? Whoa, Paolo, that was a lot of pent-up anger here, which was entirely understandable. There was certainly a communication problem between Paolo and Anna, but it sounded to me that the underlying reason was actually a scheduling problem rather than a communications problem. So I asked Paolo if he could just list all the project managers who were giving him work. And with that list, we set up a framework so that all the project managers had visibility of what Paolo was being asked to do. And of course, there was the possibility of adding in holidays as well. Having introduced that, the communications between Paolo and the other reviewers and Anna started to improve. We now came on to the 5th step, which is the automation step. we all love tools. And when we have a problem, the temptation is to go out and find a tool which will solve the problem for us. My 25 years of experience is that such a magic wand does not exist. Because it's my belief that tools are there to support what we're doing rather than to sort out what we are doing. And what we found in applying the LMM to Anna's problem was that her problem, which was communication, which she wanted to sort out by buying Forum, was a real problem, but it was perhaps not the real problem. Because by changing the process, making some adjustments to the way we communicated with the reviewers and with the creative agency, there was actually no or little need for Anna to have this tool. So the business case was never made for the Forum communications tool. On the other hand, what we did find out in changing these processes is we had a need for an e-learning tool license. Because the creative agency had a license for the e-learning tool, but if we were going to move the creation of the translated versions from the agency to us, we would need a license for the e-learning tool. The business case was therefore changed to support an application for funding for an e-learning tool for us. And we used the LMM to support the application because the most important thing in my experience with business cases is that they have to be aligned with company strategies, or there has to be an alignment in every step of building the business case. So in terms of governance, the KPIs we submitted, we identified that by putting the production of the translated versions of the e-learning course with us, we were expecting to see an improvement in the speed in which these versions could be produced. So we tracked the time that it had taken historically to produce translated versions and made some predictions as to how that would improve once we changed the process and we took care of the production. So the KPI became the time it takes to turn the translated courses around. The second piece of alignment was with the strategy. So the company strategy didn't really come into it. It was in terms of producing content in an environmentally friendly way, didn't really get affected either by Forum or by the e-learning tool. But when it came to globalization, we made sure that we highlighted that the e-learning tool that we chose would support all the European languages that Anna and her boss were responsible for. The tool also supported Thai, Korean, and Japanese, but because the boss was not concerned about that, we kept that technical detail out of the business case. We didn't want to create clutter. Similarly, when it came to the content strategy, it was obviously aligned with the corporate-wide content strategy, which was to move from print to digital. But Anna's personal content strategy of producing each version in 3 different versions formed a special argument in support of our doing this, the translated versions of the courses. On the fourth element, on the people side, in the business case, we mentioned how we thought that with the changes in process that we'd proposed, there would be a reduction in the amount of communications needed, certainly with Anna, but probably also with the reviewers, and that would free up the reviewers to spend more time on what their full-time jobs were rather than doing reviews. So this was a benefit to the company. And then finally, of course, is that the tool we pitched had a lot of features. I don't think we mentioned any specific features because features are not important. It is the problems that the tool will solve which are important rather than what the tool can do itself. And then Anna submitted the application. And we waited. We were fairly confident that Anna would get approval for this purchase, so we started to put some processes in place. We reached out to all the reviewers and had set up procedures for how to communicate. And in particular, we set up our expectations of them and their expectations of us. So rather than just throwing stuff over the wall and then hoping it would come back, we actually had visibility of what was going on both sides, because they were also getting advance warning of when they could expect materials from us, and they could then plan accordingly. Similarly, with the creative agency, previously they had been responsible for producing the translated version. Now that we were doing that, there would have to be a change in the workflow, but they were very open to this change in workflow, so they could concentrate on what they were best at, which was to create original content. And in the end, Anna got approval for the e-learning tool, which would then come to us, so we could produce the translated versions. So what happened? Well, we had the approval, we got the software, there were the usual niggles, wrong license key, missing hardware, outdated software drivers, but we got it sorted out and the project went ahead. And the project went remarkably well because everybody was on board with this new process. And then disaster struck. Because right at the end of the project, legal came back and told us that we had translated a product claim which hadn't been approved. Now, for you who don't know what product claims are, these are statements about the product, and in certain jurisdictions, certainly in Europe, you cannot make a claim unless it's validated by scientific evidence. And we knew this was going to be an issue, and that's why we had told Anna up front, make sure we get all the product claims, make sure they've all been signed off by legal, and that the translations have been signed off by legal. And that was fine. But where the process broke down was that late in the process, after we had started, product development came up with a new product, marketing came up with a new claim, and in a rush, they got it translated by going straight to the reviewers. Nobody told us that this had happened. And the result was we had translated the product claims in a different way. What to do? So we reached out to the marketing department and asked them where the translated claims were. They shrugged their shoulders. Here today, gone tomorrow. They didn't know. And this is where our relationship with the reviewers came in real handy, because we were able to reach out to the reviewers and get the translated contents. How they found them, I don't know. I got the impression that some of them had them on their hard disks, some had them on USB sticks, some might even have had them in their top drawer. In any case, we managed to get all the translated claims, and eventually we got the training courses out and they were produced on time. A couple of weeks later, I visited Anna, and Anna and her team were ecstatic. They had understandably been quite nervous because this was quite a new it was a completely new process for them. And they were surprised at how well it had gone. Okay, we'd had the niggle with the product claim, but in the end we got there. And Anna was convinced that this was the way that we should be producing training courses in future.